So to get started, I'm super excited to have Scott Kirsner here. Scott Kirsner is kind of the journalist that you think of in Boston whenever you think of anything startup and VC stories. Writes the innovation economy column for the Boston Globe. He's also written for Wired and Fast Company and New York Times. Just awesome person to know for anything startup media coverage in Boston, and he's going to be talking about how to create relationships with bloggers and the press. Just curious, was anybody here at last week's marketing boot camp? You already know what I'm going to ask. So this should be a really great follow-up to that. Hopefully you've brought your cocktail pitches for Scott. So thank you.
I'm really nervous kind of being here because Tom Eisenman showed up and he's sitting in the front row, and I don't give group lectures a lot, and I'm not used to working with these sliding Harvard blackboards, and so I feel terribly unprepared and out of my element here. I mean, mostly I sit around either talking to people on the phone all day or maybe going out to visit companies as I was doing this morning, and just asking annoying questions. So public speaking is not my strong suit. But that said, this is a presentation I've given in a couple different contexts, and over time I've been deconstructing it. Like, it started as a PowerPoint presentation with how many slides are you supposed to have? Like 40 slides. Every PowerPoint presentation has at least 40 slides, and you try to get through them in 30 minutes, and it's a disaster. And so I've kind of been taking it apart, and I'm not going to show you any slides. This is like the whole outline of what I hope to get through. Today I want to make it super interactive. When you have questions or I say something you don't agree with or that's confusing, I hope you'll jump in and rebut something, or maybe just share your experience if you had some experience interacting with bloggers or journalists so far. I don't think my point of view is the only point of view, but my overarching goal is just to help you understand a little bit about how this process works, how magazines and newspapers and bloggers think. I know a little bit less about how TV producers think, so I won't try to be the expert on how you're going to get on the Today Show or Good Morning America with your product. But I want to tell you a little bit about the mindset, how the process works, how you can kind of be a better resource as an entrepreneur to journalists, so that the first time you interact isn't saying, hey, please cover my company, but it's like they know who you are, and maybe they've met you at a conference, or maybe you've helped them out with a story that wasn't directly about you. So that's kind of the building relationships part. And the metaphor, the thing that this is really similar to is everyone talks about how do you raise money from VCs and angels. And there's so many workshops and sessions about that. People don't talk about this process, but it's really similar, right? Like, I would say that if you go to a VC session, they'll tell you don't try to shotgun your business plan or your deck to every VC in North America and think that you're going to get a response, right? You need to learn about VCs and what they invest in, and who do you know that maybe has pitched them before, or who do you know that maybe they've invested in before, and really kind of understand who your target is before you send them anything, even that first introductory email. And the same thing is true with journalists. I'll show you my inbox from today later in this presentation, and you'll see how many shotgun pitches journalists get, where it's like, often it's like, dear Fred, they don't even get my name right. They don't know that I'm in Boston, that I mostly cover companies in Boston. And so there's everything you could say about sort of focusing and targeting VC and investor pitches. The same is true for journalists. And I think, the case that I would make is, money is really important for many startups. You can't build a product or start a service without money. But, whether or not you raise money successfully, you kind of need awareness, and you need users, and you need employees, and you need, enterprise customers. And that's something that VCs can't often hand you, but free publicity and coverage in the world of blogs and journalism can get you. So, that's kind of what I hope to do. What I wanted to start is just talking about, so what are the problems that startups have that coverage, getting covered, getting free publicity can address? And I would say I'm going to ask you for kind of, are there some problems that you guys are dealing with that coverage would address? But I would say, maybe the first 3 or 4 I think about are, 1, no one cares that you exist, or no one knows that you exist. 2 is maybe you're trying to recruit employees. It's phenomenally hard to find a CTO or find a software developer, a UX designer. So maybe you want publicity to help you build out your team. The third problem that you see a lot is like there'll be a front page story in the Wall Street Journal and it's about mobile payment, and you're a mobile payment company and they list 7 mobile payment companies in the story, but they didn't know about you. And so that's a problem that often, like, you read that front page story in the Wall Street Journal and your heart sinks because you wish that reporter knew about, your product. But like, what's another example of a problem that you might be running into that you're trying to solve that you think coverage could solve? This is where there's audience participation. Yeah?
Get in front of the buyer.
Get in front of a customer, yeah, buyer, yeah.
Well, beta users, getting someone who will give you real feedback because they have that problem.
Yeah, okay, so beta users and kind of feedback on what you're trying to do, yes?
I mean, we're trying to go with an inbound marketing strategy where we have like a voice ourselves, and I wonder if bloggers could help us amplify like our own presence as an outlet.
Yeah, great. So content that you're creating about what you're doing, can bloggers or the media help amplify that? It's a great point. I mean, I think, often media coverage plays into the funding problem of, you don't have any buzz, and so it's hard to get meetings with investors, or you do get meetings, but you get the standard, well, come back in 6 months when you have some users response. And so I've seen, I often see, if I'm writing about a company that no one's written about before, I'll get a few emails from angel investors or VCs saying like, hey, can you make an introduction to the founder of that company? But what's another example of a problem? I think we've covered a lot of them, but maybe you have others.
Building trust.
Building trust, like building credibility for the company.
An entrepreneur has to tell their story over and over to everybody, so if you can tell it to the press well, you probably got it done.
Yeah, so honing your story and I guess building your reputation so that when you're knocking on doors for customers or for investors, people have heard a little bit about you before. I mean, I think of how many times I had to hear about Twitter before I signed up for it. I think it's the 8-year anniversary of Twitter. Is that what Malik was just the 7th? He was just publishing his original post about Twitter, and I think about like, man, I did hear about Twitter 2 or 3 times before I signed up for it, and then I heard about it probably another half dozen times before I actually posted anything on Twitter. So every product is the same way, particularly in the mobile app space where every day your friends are telling you about a few new apps that like, oh, you have to download this. Media can help kind of build that awareness. Element number 2 is that if we're trying to get away from the shotgun approach in terms of thinking about, you can buy lists or you can hire a PR firm that has a list of every journalist who writes about e-commerce sites in North America. And if you pay the PR firm money, they will have a 20-something young employee send emails and follow up those emails with calls to all of those journalists. And it hardly ever pays off because it's not really targeted, it's not very one-to-one or very personalized. So, the big piece of advice that I would get you started thinking about is, and we'll kind of make this interactive too, is just like, who is your audience? If you think about that problem of we're trying to hire people, or we're trying to get that first investment, the first $100,000 of funding, or we're trying to get the first big enterprise customer to try our software, what are those people reading? Think about your audience of who you need to reach at this stage in the game and what do they read. There's this phenomenal obsession with the stuff that entrepreneurs read, and so often they'll say like, oh, we need to get in TechCrunch because they read TechCrunch every day, but they're not thinking that a retail buyer at the Gap never looks at TechCrunch, and their big goal is to get into the Gap, or the buyer at Whole Foods, they're making a new brand of granola, and the buyer of Whole Foods has never heard of TechCrunch or has never heard of VentureBeat or all these websites, GigaOM, all these websites that entrepreneurs tend to read. So if you, take a minute here and write down, most of you have paper I see, so like write down, if you think about like an audience that you're trying to reach, and think about 1 or 2 publications, could be a blog, could be a print publication, could be a TV show, that you think that audience probably reads. An example I would give you is like maybe you're targeting CIOs and you would say, well, they read CIO Magazine or they read Information Week. If you're targeting pilots, they read Flying Magazine. If you're targeting ad agencies, they probably read Advertising Age. So give me that audience and what they read for your product. And if someone already has one in mind, maybe you'll raise your hand. Yeah.
Especially targeting a local legal market. There's a mass lawyer, and these guys are have extremely baroque media habits.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough audience to target.
So targeting lawyers, they read Mass Lawyers Weekly. Probably they read Boston Business Journal, right? That has a big readership among attorneys. Anything else? Like, do they read anything national legal journals or publications?
They do, but for a particular client who's really who's very focused, that's a lot of wasted coverage if you try that.
Mm-hmm.
That gets to be sort of shotgun.
Yeah. Okay. How about someone else, an audience, and what they read or what they pay attention to? Yeah.
We're making a music app mostly for classical musicians, and I'd say they mostly listen to classical radio. Like in New York, it'd be WQXR, or NPR programs, and then they'd probably read the art sections of any newspaper. So
like the art section of the Globe or the New York Times or LA Times, San Francisco newspaper. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, cool. How about one or two other people, an audience you're trying to reach and what they pay attention to? There are no wrong answers, I don't think. I haven't heard any wrong answers yet. Yeah.
We're targeting college kids who like to read and share a lot online. So one of our target places is Reddit, because those people are already there to discover new things and share.
All right, cool. How about one more? Jane.
We're targeting mothers, especially stay-at-home moms, so sites like Baby Center or mommy blogs like The Motherload on the New York Times, and other random mommy blogs.
Cool. You know, the thing that's interesting is like you're going to do, I mean, every entrepreneur does some amount of interviewing their target audience or their target customer, right? You're going around to college students, you're going around talking to moms, you're talking to CIOs or people who buy for liquor stores if you're launching a new brand of beer. And you know, one interesting question to ask in all those interviews is, what do you read? You know, what do you most pay attention to? What's the first thing you look at in the morning, just to make sure that you have the right publications on your radar screen? You know, because there may be these weird arcane, you know, maybe they're really old trade publications that people just still read out of habit. Maybe there are new blogs that just launched a month or so ago that you haven't heard about yet. But you know, you need to have your list of 3 or 4 or 5 publications that you're reading because this target audience, maybe customer base, maybe employees, maybe funders are reading. And then you need to start noticing like who are the people that write for those publications. And let's not call it stalking, right? But you need to be like following them on Twitter. You need to have an RSS feed where you're seeing their articles. You need to occasionally be emailing them and saying like, hey, that was a fantastic article. If you're interested in, if you're going to write about that topic again, you should know about my company, which is going to launch a new microbrew. And I know you write about, microbrews in the southwestern United States. Here's my cell phone number. Call me anytime. So you're kind of aware of who the journalists are that you need to be building relationships with. And following them on Twitter, retweeting their articles, pinging them every once in a while with story ideas. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in building relationships. But don't think about there as being like an infinite number of journalists and bloggers in the world. Just think about like these 3 or 5 bloggers that are going to be important for you to develop relationships with, as you're getting ready to launch your product and kind of build your company from there. So questions about that? Okay. I was thinking about yeah.
As someone who gets a lot of these random emails, what are kinds of subject lines that draw your attention that get you to even open the email before you start reading and realizing that it is I'm sure you're getting a lot of material. So what catches your eye, I guess?
I think it's that, so the approach we're talking about is a rifle approach where you have this very short list of people and you know what they cover. And so you can say, for me, an example is like, we're a Boston-based music startup getting ready to launch our app. Like something is happening now. We're in Boston. We know you care about Boston. The worst examples, and I'll probably show you some from my inbox, are like, our survey says 48% of CIOs are really worried about data loss. You know, and like you get a lot of these things where like someone has done a survey of a customer base, they think the results are interesting, and like, man, no one cares. Like, they just want to, you know, it segues nicely into talking about like the brain of journalists and bloggers. And like the biggest thing is like, journalists and bloggers today are looking like much more so than when I started my career, like in '97. Is that the right year? Yeah, I think around '97. Are looking like for something unique and to be the first to kind of cover your story, cover your company, cover some little tidbit of news about you. And so, you know, that's the way the brain works nowadays, whether you're a New York Times or Wall Street Journal reporter, or you're blogging for TechCrunch, or you're blogging for, you know, restaurant industry news. You just really want something unique. And so that gets us even more to the importance of like a targeted person-to-person, human being approach. Like if I get an email from you and it's clear that it was written to me, you know, it's not 17 paragraphs and signed, you know, like Beth Smith, account, you know, assistant account manager, so-and-so PR firm, like it's written by someone at the company, that carries so much more weight with the journalist. So like in a way, if, you know, you're almost in better position before you have the money to hire a PR firm. Because once you hire a PR firm, you become like, you know, unfortunately, one of those thousands of pitches that journalists get from PR firms. So, you know, the cost-benefit trade-off right now is that, you know, you're trading your time, your precious entrepreneur time, for that benefit of a relationship that feels really authentic and sort of a communication exchange that feels really authentic, where like, I care about entrepreneurs that are emailing me. I care much less about the person that's paid to email journalists all day. And we can, you know, showing you some subject lines will probably answer that question a little bit better. But, you know, if I'm to think about the brain, so it's like looking for some unique story to tell, you know, finding that next Twitter or that next Facebook or that next, you know, great entrepreneurial success story to write about is kind of the way the brain works. And, you know, I think, you know, there are many different kinds of journalists. You know, there are people who have to write 3 blog posts a day. And so like they're really hungry for, you know, if their job is to cover, you know, pick a startup category like, you know, entertainment related startups, they're going to be super receptive to hearing about almost any new entertainment startup. And so, you know, that's one category. But another category, I've done a lot of writing for Wired and Fast Company over the years. And there you're looking for like something that's going to be big enough to be a magazine story. Like, is your idea cool enough that I, as a Wired writer, want to spend like 3 or 4 weeks hanging out with your company and watching as you go and pitch VCs and pitch potential customers and, you know, go to TechCrunch Disrupt to launch your product and things like that. Were you going to jump in, Abby? Okay. So different journalists are kind of looking for different things, but one sec, Chris. But you know, the first kind of having something unique is the most important. Like I said, for a lot of magazines, which you know, are coming out every month, they often just want to tell stories that have, you know, that kind of depth, that interesting character. I mean, one example that I like using is a Fast Company piece that I wrote about a medical device company that, you know, it was just sort of about the challenges of being a medical device company and getting approved by the FDA. And it was a story that like, they were in Houston, they had a company called Cyberonics. They had a crazy kind of cowboy CEO who had been a venture capitalist who stepped in to run the company, I think when he probably fired the previous CEO. And it was a story where I could go to an operating room at Children's Hospital Boston and watch a surgeon, you know, implant the device in like an 8-year-old girl. And so like sometimes journalists are looking for that kind of drama and experience and color. So, you know, so that's kind of a difference, whereas, you know, bloggers are working on this like very fast-paced, short attention span. I need to talk to you for 30 minutes and then spend, you know, the next 30 minutes writing your story, and then it will be up on the blog, versus I'm going to spend a month with you, and, you know, you're going to have a fantastic Fortune magazine story at the end of the process. Chris.
Thanks, Scott. So quick question. From a journalist perspective, how early in the game are you looking to establish a relationship with a company? And from a company's perspective, how early should they be looking to start establishing that relationship with you as a journalist?
I mean, it's a good question. I think sometimes I'll get contacted by an entrepreneur who like really is at the idea stage. Like, you know, they're not even at the, you know, they don't have a desk at the iLab yet. You know, they're just like thinking about something. And like, that's a little bit too early. Like, I can't really be a consultant and giving people advice about, you know, okay, so you're going to do a biotech startup. You know, here, let me introduce you to some people in the scene and let me tell you, you know, who the best, you know, chemists are. And you know, journalists aren't consultants for the most part. So, you know, the point where you want to hear from people is like where there's a demo to see or a product to touch and feel that may not have launched yet, but, you know, it doesn't hurt to start a relationship even if you're saying, you know, hey, we have a launch date in mind of, you know, August 1st, and I want to give you a sneak peek at what we're doing. But we're looking for coverage on August 1st when our product is going to show up on the shelves of every Best Buy in America or whatever. And we could talk a little bit more about managing the whole timing issue because there's a lot of nuance to that. But you know, you don't want to sort of be chasing journalists when they feel like the story kind of already happened. You know, this is actually an interesting example. This kind of most recent post on my blog about Greentown Labs moving to Somerville. And you know, what happened was someone who worked at Greentown is like an incubation space for clean tech companies. They have about 28 companies down near South Station in a really nice grungy kind of workspace. And someone had posted on LinkedIn over this past weekend, like, hey, we're getting ready to move. We just wanted you to know. It was like kind of written for their residents and the people who kind of come to events at the space. And then one or two people tweeted about it. And it didn't quite say where they were moving or what the specifics were, but like I started feeling like, man, the story's kind of getting out there and it's almost getting a little bit too well known for me to want to write about. But like they didn't talk about the new location and how much space it was and kind of what the incentives they got from Somerville to move over from Boston to Somerville. But you know, there can be these cases where someone will put out a press release and email journalists after it's gone out over the wire and been seen by a lot of people and say like, hey, will you write about us now? And you know, you're kind of like running after the bus at that point. You know, a lot of journalists will feel like, well, you put out the press release or you put up your blog post saying you raised $10 million, like, you want me to cover it now? Like, every journalist likes to feel like they're ahead of the news and their editors want them to be ahead of the news. So like, that's the way you need to help them, you know, is by making them feel like you're giving them something before it's, you know, it's happened.
So the follow-up question,
yeah.
How do you handle staying exclusive with maybe one journalist or one magazine for a product launch? Do you stay true and authentic to them, or do you kind of fish out 3 or 4 journalists to approach?
So, you know, the idea of an exclusive is saying to a journalist, like, let's say your top target when you're thinking about your audiences, you know, your top target is Forbes. You know, like you want to reach that, you know, Wall Street media type reader in New York, and you know, Forbes magazine is kind of the place you want to be. You might say, you might email the reporter that covers your space and say, look, I want to give you the exclusive about our launch or about our funding or whatever the news event is, and give it to them first, and then everybody else on your list, you may email them the day of that story comes out and say like, hey, just wanted to let you know, but Forbes has got the exclusive, and you're telling everybody else kind of after that story has run. So you kind of maximize your chance of getting in that #1 publication, but minimize the chance of getting much coverage from some others. But the other approach is really trying to pick 4 or 5 publications and work with them all kind of on equal footing. We just called it embargo. And so the example there might be saying, you know, we're going to be in the App Store on August 1st, and we have these 5 publications that we care about, and can we get them all to agree on an embargo and all write on August 1st? And wouldn't that be great? You know, the problem is that sometimes outlets accidentally break embargoes. Like, the person will write the post on July 17th, and they'll accidentally publish it that day because they're a blogger and they forgot to set the blog dashboard to schedule it for August 1st. And like it's an honest mistake, but it gets published. And then everybody else is pissed off at you because they think you did something bad. Sometimes, very rarely, people will break embargoes intentionally where they just, whatever, they're feeling under pressure to break a story and they'll click publish even though they know they shouldn't. And then a lot of times journalists will just say, I find myself doing this increasingly, like if you're working with 5 different outlets and we're all going to write the story that Andreessen Horowitz has given you $5 million in funding and here's what your company does, I'm not sure that my story is going to be that much different or better than those other 4 people's stories. And I'd rather spend my time on stuff that I have that's unique, you know, where I'm going to have the only story on the internet for who knows how long, a couple hours, a couple days about what's going on. So does that make sense? You know, the embargo thing is kind of an old game that PR firms tried to play where it was like, something's going to happen in a week or 2 weeks. We want to tell everybody about it, but have them hold it till this specific time. And it's just, for all those reasons, it's kind of eroding a little bit as a, you know, as an approach. When I show you my email inbox, you'll see people are still requesting, you know, do you want to know this under embargo? And the other thing that sometimes happens, I should mention, is that like the 5 publications will agree to an embargo, and you'll be working with them all like, hey, Andreessen Horowitz is giving us $5 million, and here's what we do, and you know, here are all our advisors, and we just hired this guy who used to, you know, work at Bank of America and whatever. And then there's a 6 reporter who just is a really good reporter, and he has a source who, you know, went mountain biking with someone from Andreessen Horowitz who mentioned to him that they were funding this new company in Boston that just hired someone from Bank of America. And so the 6th reporter is just a kick-ass reporter, and he'll publish the story, and then you have these other 5 publications that agreed to the embargo going like, you know, I wrote a story and I got scooped by someone who just was doing their job, basically. Yeah.
You touched on a nuance there, is the unique versus the uniqueness, I guess. It's not necessarily you're the first product in that category. If you're the 6th, you have to find a way to make that story unique so you'll pick it up. Mm-hmm. I guess the same way if you've got 5 different reporters who all are thinking it's the same story, why do I really want to do this? Do you need to make it unique, spin it for each of those people, or find something that's going to get them really excited about it?
Yeah, you do. I mean, it's probably the reporter's job is like if you're going to write a good story about a startup, like you want to find the unique aspects of it. Like, well, tell me the story about like how did you first meet Mark Andreessen, you know, and you know, look for that color of like how did you persuade this guy from Bank of America to join your little 3-person startup. And so it's probably the reporter's job, but yeah, sometimes entrepreneurs do try to like give everybody something a little unique, like, oh, I'm going to give you the picture of our first product, and I'll give this other guy a video that we just shot, and I'll give this other person sort of a interview with our first customer that I didn't offer to everybody else. But that can get into being a little bit too gamey, you know, and you know, there's a lot of stuff you can overthink in the life of an entrepreneur. Like that can go a little bit into bleed a little bit into overthinking. So, yeah, I mean, I would just say the journalist blogger brain is very small, and you know, like it's like a hamster brain. You know, it's thinking about the near term. How do you get that next food pellet of like unique story? You know, and it is built on, you know, like we can talk about this a little bit more when we get to point number 5, but it is built on like people that you know who call you or who email you, or people who follow you on Twitter or are familiar to you in some way, like you met them at a conference, or, you know, whatever. They once sent you an email and complimented you on an article. Just like there's that human relationship thing of once someone knows you and you're kind of on their radar screen, it's so much easier to get them to write about you, you know, and it's so much harder when you're just a LinkedIn profile or you're just an email signature. You know, so this goes back to the VC metaphor, you know, approach it the same way of like, it's about getting to know the people that you need to know in the media world, and not having it be this abstract, you know, just like you need to know VCs and you need to get to know real flesh and blood customers, you know, you need to get to know real flesh and blood journalists too. What I want to talk about in terms of different stories to tell is that you can kind of break down, instead of, you can kind of break down what you're trying to do by thinking about different types of stories. And so sometimes these are just different ways to spin your story to different publications or different writers to see what works and which version of the story people like the best and seem to respond to. But it can also be just telling different stories at different times in the company's life cycle. So like a few examples I would say of stories, and I know there are some journalists and PR folks in the audience, so you can add to this if you would, but funding, as we mentioned, like funding is a story opportunity that we just raised our seed fund, our seed round, or our A round, or whatever, our B round, our C round, on and on. Eventually acquisition or IPO is hopefully a story that you'll get to talk to people about. Office space can be a story. I mean, there are certain publications, we mentioned Boston Business Journal before, like they'll often cover, hey, Zipcar just moved from Cambridge to Fort Point Channel, like that's a story. Zipcar kind of turned it into more of a story by like creating a parade of Zipcars and like handing out free t-shirts and stuff along the route. It sort of reminded me of like the old school, like the old days when the circus came to town, they'd have the circus parade down Main Street with the elephants. Kind of a PR stunt, but the Globe and other people covered that as news. A big hire, the Bank of America executive, or we just got someone there's a startup called Gemvara that does online jewelry, kind of customized online jewelry, and they hired some big name e-commerce executives, first from like Zappos, and then from Victoria's Secret, and then from like Rue La La, and so all of those things were stories for different outlets, like, hey, these guys are hiring some big name people for their startup. A big customer can be a story, like, hey, we just landed American Airlines, to use our, tablet technology for, whatever. People will cover that. Two other examples, and I'm curious if there are some that you can mention, but a trend story, like an example of a trend story today would be like, so, there's Google Glass and there may be an Apple Watch, there's the Pebble Watch, so like wearable technology is a trend story. And so if you're developing something wearable, you could pitch yourself, you could say, all right, we're gonna be the first intelligent belt buckle. And when you're talking to journalists, you can say, well, you've heard of the Pebble Watch, you've heard of Google Glass, like we're the world's first Wi-Fi connected belt buckle, and so you're not just pitching your story, like they might think, well, it's crazy, like Wi-Fi belt buckles, but you sort of pitch it as like, hey, there's all this stuff people are wearing. First they wore Bluetooth headsets, and now they're wearing glasses, and belt buckles are the future. And then finally, like there can be lots of interesting founder-driven stories. It's like the boyfriend and girlfriend who met in college and fell in love and started a company together, and now like she's the CTO and he's the CEO. The people two entrepreneurs that met at Startup Weekend and had this great idea and kept it going. On the Monday after Startup Weekend, they both quit their jobs because it was such a fantastic idea and they were going to pursue it. Like, so don't. A lot of times people get too analytical and they think the only story they can tell is about the product and the problem it solves and the customer using it. But often, like the people angle can be really interesting. It's like where you and your co-founders met, or like this kind of interesting story that I wrote about in the Globe a couple weeks ago. It's a guy, I can't remember his last name, but Gordon Russell. And he's been running this chain of retail shops around Massachusetts that mostly sell like Lilly Pulitzer apparel. Like it's floral. Jane knows what I'm talking about. Like it's this like floral, really beachy, resorty apparel for women. And he has a chain of 8 stores. And his startup is actually like a data analytics SaaS platform for other retailers like him. Because he's basically saying like, look, we rely on the sales clerks to know each customer and sort of remember what size they bought last time. And when they tend to come into the store. Do they come in the spring or in the fall? But what if you could capture all that data and have it accessible to any employee or any executive on a tablet or a mobile phone? So he's doing a startup called Sagamore Retail. So it's interesting that he comes out of the real world of actually selling stuff in a store, and he's trying to develop software for other retailers. That's a really great people story, and it's kind of what captured my imagination, I think, more than if he had just been a software entrepreneur saying like, hey, I have this data analytics, SaaS package for retailers. And sometimes it can be like, whatever, my dad was a general contractor and I'm now doing a mobile app for contractors that let them, manage their employee base and when they're showing up and how many hours they're working and things like that. So any other examples you could think of like, would this be a story, a way to pitch my story in a different way, or is this a bad example of a story to tell?
What about a law firm that did a lot of nonprofit law that opened a community for nonprofits and is now giving pro bono legal work to 10 at the same time because they house them?
Yeah, that's a cool story. So established companies doing something innovative. People are looking for like, I use the word uniqueness a lot, but like surprising stuff, counterintuitive stuff, weird stuff. Like, I remember I think it was the first story I ever wrote for Fast Company was this story about a company called NECX. And I was thinking about it because I just tracked down someone for a different story who used to work there. But the pitch came from a PR firm. And it was like the only time I ever wrote something for Fast Company, I think, that was pitched by a PR firm. But he said the management team at this company, and they were up in Beverly or one of the northern suburbs, has hired a psychiatrist to work with them to eliminate conflicts or to reduce conflicts among the management team. And I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Like, what company would ever admit that things had gotten to that point where they needed a psychiatrist? And, the headline was something like, want to grow, hire a shrink. And they were talking about how this company, like in sort of going from the old world of what they used to do, which was, I think, like selling electronics components, to the new world of online commerce. Like, all these conflicts came up between the internet guys and the old line guys, and they had hired a psychiatrist to work it out. So other examples you can think of, or wondering like, is this a spin? Yeah.
So I see a lot of teams, they get into...
Neil has a microphone for you. Yeah.
They'll get into a high-profile incubator or accelerator, Techstars or Y Combinator or something like that, and they're well enough connected that they can get written about pretty much wherever they want, right? TechCrunch or Mashable, or you name it, paid content. But if you really sort of peel apart what they've got, the product is still pretty wobbly, and they're not really in a position to grow the business yet.
Yeah.
So, as an advisor to teams like that, I tell them, wait. You're only going to get one wave of publicity, and if you pull the trigger too fast, you're going to waste it, because the second wave is going to be journalists looking for a unique angle, and your second wave of publicity may be how you, after our expectations were so high, how you stumbled. Am I giving bad advice, telling people to hold off?
Well, I mean, it depends on like what they need at this point. Like sometimes people really are like starving for users, and like they need the first 100 users for their product. And like, Paul Graham just wrote a great post about this, his post this week about, entrepreneurs do things that don't scale. And like, well, yeah, you could like go around, if you're trying to build a new real estate site in Alston, could go knock on doors in Alston and ask people to register, like go with your iPad and register them at the door for your site. Or you could try to get like the Alston Tab or Wicked Local Alston or some publication that those people read to write about you and get you your first 100 users. Like, I think there aren't a lot of examples where things get hyped so much from that initial wave that then journalists go and look for the like, let me puncture the hype story. Yeah, Color would be a great example, the app which, does anyone remember Color's launch publicity? It was a photo app for the iPhone that raised how much? Like $80 million in initial funding. It was going to be like the photo app to end all photo apps. And you downloaded it, and it was like not exactly clear what it did or how you were supposed to use it. So people immediately then looked for like, are these guys crazy? Like, who invested $80 million in a photo app that no one was using? So And maybe Bloom Energy would be another example in the clean tech space. So like every once in a while, there's something that gets so hyped that people do come around looking for the debunking story, but it's an anomalous problem to have. It's like the Instagram problem of like, do you plan your business expecting that you're going to be the next Instagram? So I would say that like press is often a solution to the problem if like no one knows who you are, and so you post job postings and no one applies because no one's heard of you before, you have no credibility, investors aren't returning your phone calls. Like press can really be a positive in those situations. But like, yeah, a lot of times companies get into accelerator programs and the right time to do press is at the end of the accelerator program. Like sometimes it's not on demo day, but it's like the week before demo day because there's going to be so much coverage of the 10 or 12, or with Y Combinator, it's like sometimes been 80 companies that are in that class. So let me, yeah, go ahead. And then I'll show you, I'll sort of change the order a little bit just to show you like my inbox, which will make things a little more concrete.
How much contradiction helps get attention from the current path on something, and then a startup is contradicting what has been established so far?
So say again, say more about what you mean.
There is a certain understanding in a scientific community that X happens because of Y, and a startup says it's not, and we're going to prove that. It's a contradiction. So would it help get attention?
Yeah. And I mean, another example of that is just to say, sorry, this is the laptop here, not my laptop, so it's hard to manage. But like another example of that would be, the David versus Goliath story is a good story to tell, which is like company A has sold, big, expensive, infrequently updated enterprise software in the grocery industry for the last 40 years. And like, we're the David that's coming into that industry, and for $5 a month, we're selling a SaaS solution that does 150% of what the established player does. I'm hoping there isn't anything embarrassing up here because I didn't really check. I checked before I came over, but so I mean, the David versus Goliath story is another good one. The counterintuitive, like surprising, like, you never think like, I'm the first employee that ever left Amazon.com to do a startup, or like pick a big well-known company. I'm the first person that ever left Twitter to go off and do something else, or Google, or things that are counterintuitive or surprising often get people's attention. So like a lot of this is personal email, but I just want to show some examples. Like, oh, here's one. Former iRobot executive launching data center startup from a PR firm. So it's good in that, like, well, I know iRobot is a local company. I'm interested, like we were just saying, people leaving well-known companies. That's another story. Is like, Zipcar just went public. They were just sold to Avis. Taken off. I'm going to go do a startup. Like, that's a nice background for an entrepreneur. But this is, this is someone saying, I want to give you a heads up regarding a startup that will be exiting stealth mode. Here's an advanced copy of the release. And so this one just doesn't feel like, even though they did get my name right, hello, Scott, it doesn't feel like, it's not very much notice. Like, we're putting this release out tomorrow, so you either write about it, either throw everything off your desk for today and write about us, call us right now, or like you're going to miss the boat. And then there's not uniqueness. Like, they're just saying, we're going to announce this to the world tomorrow. We're exiting stealth mode. We think everybody's going to care about what we're doing. Audit Buddy, the first standalone temperature and humidity monitor for data centers. I don't see what you're laughing. Like, it's much better business idea than the Wi-Fi belt buckle, right? But I'm just, this is just me kind of riffing off these pitches. And so there's a release attached as a Word doc. One point I would make is, don't attach Word docs. Like, why do people want to open Word docs or PowerPoints or any other attachment? Like, if you at all possibly can, just put it in the, put it in the email. it's funny that I often get pitch emails where like the only content is an attached document. So like they're betting that whatever, I'm not on my phone with not enough bandwidth to open up the attachment, or that I don't feel like opening up the attachment. Someone out there was going to say something. Yeah?
Why did Adam send you that email? I mean, does he just have a mass distro list of people that he's sending this off to? Is that?
I don't know. It'd be funny to call him and ask. I really don't know why. That would make this very interactive. But I don't really know. I mean, like either he just reads my column in the Globe, or he has a mass list. He's not someone that I think I've worked with in the past. So this is actually a good one. This is an example of a PR person from Launch Squad doing something intelligent, which is like I was tweeting today just to look for examples of Massachusetts companies that are like building developer ecosystems around them, like in the way that Apple and Facebook and Google all have developer ecosystems. And so because she was following me on Twitter, right, she knew that like, oh, that seems like Scott's going to work on a story, so let me tell him about my client. And so she says, my client's Acquia, a little bit of background, and is this something that may fit? So like, at least I can tell this is like a human being who follows me on Twitter, who's trying to do something useful, and like, it gives me the chance to decide, does Acquia fit into this story or not? Oh, see, I just did something. I'm probably going to delete all my email in front of you guys. It might not be bad. This is an example of like, we were talking about subject lines before, how companies worldwide could save $59 billion on software development. Like, it's not really a grabber, And it turned out I did open it just for your sake, because I was just looking for examples. And like, this is a local company. It's called Black Duck Software, venture-backed company, has been around for like 8 or 10 years. Like, it falls into my mental category of like companies that are sort of trundling along, trying to get some momentum or hope someone buys them. And this is just not a really good, not a really good example. I feel like an 80-year-old person trying to use this computer. But it is, it's someone who knows that I was on vacation. So like at least there's a little bit of, human to human communication. Yeah.
So how do we know, what stories people work on at the moment? So like you mentioned Twitter, how else?
There's something called Help a Reporter Out, which is worth knowing about. That people call it HARO, H-A-R-O. And it's some service where reporters often will post, particularly like reporters who are bloggers or who are daily newspaper reporters, and like they're constantly on a deadline, and they're like, okay, I need to write a story. Tomorrow's 4th of July, and so I'm looking for, interesting companies. I have to write about 4th of July picnics. And so like, are there some new food startups that are doing like interesting artisanal takes on picnic food? And so they'll like literally post, I'm looking for food startups with picnic related stuff. And so if you're developing like a new relish mustard or, packaged fruit salad, I want to hear from you. And so they'll have contact information and it'll have a deadline. And so it's your opportunity to say like, oh, hey, I'm Scott's Fruit Salad. We're a startup in, Brookline, and like we'd love to talk to you for the story. So that's Help a Reporter Out is one example. But following people on Twitter, often reporters will tell you what they're working on Twitter. And then those are the best examples. I mean, there are these things called editorial calendars that some magazines publish. And so like, you can sometimes go on a magazine website and see that, oh, you brought me a mouse that will maybe make it easier to. Sometimes monthly magazines, like, maybe Advertising Age will say, like, all right, our December issue is going to be about mobile advertising, and our January issue is going to be about, next generation analytics, and our February issue is going to be about X. So if you can find an editorial calendar that lets you say, hey, we're a new analytics company, like, we'd love to be on your radar screen for that issue. Let's see. Oh, I think this might work. Thanks, Neil. I'll just show you a couple other examples, because this is like concrete and, I don't know, interesting. Yeah.
Sir, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Given the amount of information that you receive daily, do you prefer to read like short messages or like a bit longer ones with more details? Is there some kind of a length that after which you just give up reading, sort of say?
Wait, ask the question a little bit louder because I didn't totally hear it. Is there some point in the message where I?
Yeah, let's say that, do you want to get like shorter, briefer messages or longer messages with like a little more details? Is there some critical length that like after which you just give up reading, close it or delete it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, shorter emails tend to be like written by a human being to one person. Like, if you think about the kind of emails you write to your team or you might write to a prospective funder, like it tends to be like 3 paragraphs or 4 pretty short paragraphs. So like longer can seem to me like to be a machine generated, or like PR firm generated email. So, this is like a nice PR person at Babson just telling me this is embargoed until 10:30. So oftentimes people trust this person is someone who knows me and knows I'm not going to like publish something before the embargo time, but like don't send out emails that say this is embargoed until noon on August 21st and send it out to 5,000 people and expect like if you want to play the embargo game, you get someone to agree like, hey, I want to tell you about our funding, but it's under embargo. Do you agree? Yes or no, as opposed to just assuming that everyone is as honorable as I am. I'm just looking for some other examples of pitches here. A lot of times internal PR people or agencies will try to like pitch someone as an expert on a topic. Companies thrive by hiring entrepreneurs. CEO of Media Temple available to discuss. I don't tend to think that works very often. This is a kind of interesting one. I'll just use this maybe as a last example unless you want me to come back to this. But so this is someone who, Boston-based company. I've written about this Upstart program, which is like a way to fund individual people the way that you would fund companies. So it's hard to describe, but it's like it's a pool of capital that gives money to people who are either going to start companies or do nonprofit stuff after school. This guy's starting a company. And this is just an embargo situation where like I think the idea is kind of cool. So none of you guys are allowed to write about what you see, but it's sort of like tracking price of products you're interested in. And so like to me it's kind of interesting because like it's consumery. A lot of what I tend to steer clear of are like if it's like middleware, data center stuff, telecom equipment, we make a vat that biotech companies make products in or like whatever. Some stuff can be just too abstruse for me to write about in the Globe, but like this is an example of something that like everyone can relate to online shopping, and often people have this problem of like you want to buy something but it's a little expensive, so you'd like to track the price. But this was just, so this is a good length of a pitch. They're clearly writing to a human being because he says, he's an early member of the Upstart network and someone whom you covered during Upstart's launch late last summer. And again, because we said the journalist brain is very small, he actually sent me a link to like, oh, you wrote about Upstart last summer. Maybe I even talked to this guy. Yeah, I mentioned him, Nathan Sharp, a graduate of Dartmouth's Tuck School. So like this is a good example of, at least they're giving me a couple days to work before the embargo ends on July 18th. But I tend to steer clear of embargo stories just because, whatever, I'd rather be spending my time working on unique stuff. So I don't think I'm going to follow up on that. And I don't know, this is I think from a PR person at the Museum of Fine Arts. And this is like a little bit too produced of an email. But I'm not sure if this is a PR pitch or just something being sent to me because I went to the Museum of Fine Arts once. So, let's not use that as an example. But there's just a lot of stuff that, this is another. Oh, here's an example. So this person, the subject is AMP idea, Boston, Techstars, coffee, and we haven't met before. And so like I did read this. It's clear that it comes from an entrepreneur. He's doing an Indiegogo campaign for something called Coffee Match, which is basically like a subscription-based coffee club. And the only reason this didn't work, he said, I used to run a company in Boston called AMP Idea, which was part of the first Techstars Boston class. But he's now living in New York, and so he tried. He said, I know how much people in Boston love coffee, which is true, right? But just my focus right now for what I'm doing for the Globe is like very geographic. In the past, when I was doing more writing for Wired and for Variety and for the New York Times, like I could be more national, but right now, kind of I need that strong Boston connection. So okay, let's leave my email alone for the moment, unless you want to come back to it and kind of go back to this kind of building relationships idea. Yeah.
Do you ever open attachments or need all the information to be in the body of the email? I saw that somebody just created some links to more information online, or do you rather have it all attached in a separate document? To what degree could, like, perhaps a public invitation double up for the information requested for the press release? And also, do images hinder or help?
Yeah, those are all good questions. I mean, I think I'm just saying, if you want to, if you want to increase your odds, like plain text with everything there in the email is great. If you want to attach an image and say like, hey, here's what our prototype product looks like, or even here's a video, 2-minute demo of what our SaaS software looks like today, all that can work. I just think if it's an extraneous attachment, like do I want the 78-slide PowerPoint presentation, that gives an overview of everything, your future product roadmap and everything you've ever thought about doing? Like, no, but people sometimes send it. Or they send like 6 attachments on an initial email, which is just like really at first you're just trying to hook someone and get them interested. It's a little bit like a pickup line of like, you just want to say figure out the right thing to say to journalists to get them to email you or call you. And so, as with all lean startup things, test a couple different approaches. Test sending the video and not sending the video, sending a product photo and not sending a product photo, sending them the secret login where they can see your site and makes them feel special, like they're getting an advanced look, and maybe it works better, maybe it doesn't work better.
So I love the learning that just came from your inbox. This is a sort of a suggestion request that plays right into building relationships. Is there a way to get a cron list of your last few stories and have, maybe by searching, I don't know the Globe site well enough to know if you can sort by story order, and just have you tell us why you wrote the story, where the relationship came from, and whether the protagonist did anything especially good in terms of building relationships to get your attention? Is that useful?
If you think it's useful, Tom, it's useful. So, this is an example I just mentioned. I guess we need to log in so that we actually can see the pictures and stuff. Okay, so this is the example I talked about where it was like an interesting personal story. Like I met a guy at a conference who owned these Lilly Pulitzer shops called In the Pink, and he was doing the pitch just as an entrepreneur. Like I have this new software thing. It's called Sagamore Retail, and I don't think he has a PR firm. I think his pitch was in person. He ran into me at 2 different events that I was at. And after the second time, I was like, yeah, I should go to the store and just kind of see how they use it in his shop on Newbury Street. This is, this story about Drizzly, which is an app for liquor delivery, was an entrepreneur emailing me. And just, I think around the time that they were kind of doing like their initial test deliveries, so like they were kind of ready for some publicity. it was something you could actually use. There's kind of an interesting, like, he's doing 2 startups at the same time, which is he had to create like an ID checking app so the people delivering could check IDs at your front door, because some people who are underage might try to use his app. You know, this is an example. This is a Harvard Business School alum, Brent Grinna, who you know, Tom, who just emailed me and said one of the early employees of Bright Cove is joining us as Chief Operating Officer. And to me, that was like one of those interesting stories we talked about before of like someone coming out of a company that IPO'd and doing their next thing. And, you know, so that's that example. And maybe I'll do 2 more. It's rare. I mean, you know, this one, can France create its own Kendall Square, where I was writing about this new innovation cluster outside of Paris, just came from like hearing through my grapevine that a bunch of people from Paris were visiting Cambridge and, you know, going to MIT labs and meeting with people in Cambridge. This is maybe a Twitter example of, this photo is not related to the story, but there's a guy named John Rodley who's doing, developing some Google Glass apps for doctors, so that if a doctor was in the hospital wearing Google Glass and someone came into the emergency room, he could actually get some data using Google Glass about what was happening with that patient before he showed up at bedside. So actually like see a video feed of the patient, see all of the heart rate, you know, and so that's just a really conceptually cool thing. And I think he was just kind of tweeting me, not direct messaging, but just @messaging me on Twitter, saying like, hey, are you coming to this Hack Fest on Saturday? And I was like, no, you know, I don't go to a lot of stuff on Saturday, you know, just because I like to have a life. And then after the Hack Fest, he tweeted me again and just said like, hey, I'd love to tell you about what we did at this hackathon on Saturday. You know, it was this app. So that was like getting my attention through Twitter. There aren't that many people that @message me. So I would say, maybe generalizing, that that's not a bad strategy as a way to get people's attention in a short way, as opposed to email. Oops, I forgot I had the mouse here. Let me just pull up one more example and then take your question. You know, this is a great innovation lab startup that, do you guys know this company, MyLingo? Yeah. So Olenka didn't pitch me on it. In fact, like, she was avoiding me for a while. But I was at an event in Boston that was like a Salesforce.com event, and like her uncle or someone related to her is advising her, told me about the idea, and I was like, wow, that's a really cool idea. And so I pestered her until she, you know, let me write about it. These are sort of collections of blog posts of mine. This is just about the Vlingo kind of diaspora. One speech recognition company got acquired by Nuance, which is the big speech recognition company in Massachusetts and the US. And so this is just kind of my grapevine telling me a little bit about former Vlingo people getting new funding and starting new companies. But let me see if I can find just one more
pitch. You mentioned any venture capitalists in an hour. Is that a place you go to?
Let me get to that in a second, because this is like my favorite story I've written in a long time, which did not come from, just came from hanging around with an entrepreneur. So this company, Endeca, was bought for $1 billion by Oracle, I think around 2011. And I happened to be at an event where Steve Papa, the co-founder of Endeca, he's also a Harvard Business School alum, as it happens. And he told me this fantastic story, like, and it was kind of in an off-the-record context about Puffer, who was their mascot, this fish. And he said that when Oracle bought Endeca, they said, we have a no pets policy, and you have to get rid of your fish. And so I was like, that is just one of those fantastic stories about what happens like when big companies acquire little companies and they step on the culture, you know, they throw the fish out with the bathwater, basically. And so like, I just worked my ass off getting Steve to like, you know, he was like, don't mention me in the story, but I'll connect you with my brother, who was our facilities manager, and actually had to find a home for the fish. And so it's about this fish that wound up getting donated to a senior citizens home on Cape Cod. And it wound up being a huge morale issue because all the employees would come in. I wish I had a picture here. All the employees would come in and see this empty fish tank when they got off the elevator and would think like Oracle took our fish away. So that didn't come from a PR person. Yeah, you have a microphone.
Yeah, so how many times have you responded to a cold email, like somebody you haven't met before or remotely connected? And how many of those are actually people you haven't met before, at least through introductions or connections?
I mean, I try to respond to like any entrepreneur cold emailing me, even if I've never met them at a conference or in a venue like this. Like I try to respond to 100% of those. So like, as long as I can kind of understand it and it's related to something that I'm trying to write about, and even if not, like the guy who was doing the coffee startup, I was just like, hey, I'm mostly writing about stuff in Boston. Good luck with the fundraising campaign, but I can't cover it right now until you decide to move back to Boston. Yeah, the puffer fish was a great story. Every once in a while, like something just falls into your lap, and it's very rarely a PR firm dropping into your lap. The other one I think about is a guy who I'm just looking for some other. This was pitched by a PR person. Forrester Research has been around for 30 years. Yet another Harvard alum, George Colony, and so I just went over and did a sit-down audio interview with him about kind of what's changed in the tech world in 30 years. There's the Drizzly story. This is another kind of startup from people who are in their 20s called Jump Shell, and they just emailed me and kind of let me know what they were up to, and it's kind of an interesting concept, which is, are there some ways that you could use your social network to find the next renter for your apartment? So like, rather than getting a real estate agent involved, could you sort of in your network of friends find the next tenant and, with the landlord give you a free month's rent if you did that for them? So just kind of conceptually interesting. And then this is just the last example. This one I forget exactly how I heard about it. But I think they just cold emailed me about this app, and it's all about requesting songs from DJs. A way for you to use your phone to request songs. And so stuff that's just cool, like stuff that's conceptually cool is easier to pitch. And Tom, what you asked about VCs, like I meet with VCs and I talk to them a lot. But the way that, so your VC can help you build relationships with press and can make introductions to press sometimes. But like often they're telling me about funding stories or new companies that like have a specific date when they want to be announced to the world. As I've said, like I try to steer clear of that. But often they can be really useful resources if I know someone invests in a lot of mobile stuff, and I'm trying to do a piece about like the current mobile games ecosystem in Boston. And so I'll ping them on Twitter or email and say like, just checking, have you invested in any mobile game startups lately? And so, it's not like you have to do anything. I mean, if someone is invested in you as a VC, their incentive is to pimp you as a company when I ask that sort of question. But maybe you want to communicate a lot with your VCs and your angels and just let them know that they can help you in that way, I guess. Yeah, Neil.
So are there things that you're not able to cover just because you don't have the time or you don't have literally the bandwidth or the web space for it? I know you used to run the post-risk blog, but things that were kind of interesting that you wanted to share but weren't perfect fits for stories. So are there things you can't cover now, and how do you deal with that kind of going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff that I want to cover that I can't cover just because I'm just one person. So some of it I try to give to other reporters and bloggers at the Globe, and the Globe is kind of trying to dial up. We have this site called The Hive now, which is, Boston.com's attempt to cover the startup and venture and big company scene better and kind of more thoroughly. And so it's sort of an aggregator. It's aggregator feed plus, so a lot of these are posts from other blogs, but then there's also a lot of original content like the Zipcar story we were talking about, or PTC buying a company, or someone's Kickstarter campaign blowing past $200,000. So yeah, I try to write about all the stuff that seems interesting to me, and when it kind of overflows, forward it to other people. And that's a fair question to ask. Like if someone says, look, I don't have the bandwidth, or I just don't have the time, or this doesn't, whatever they say, like this doesn't jingle my bells at this particular moment. Like, is there someone else there that's doing more coverage of mobile games or whatever your startup is that I should know? Isn't a bad question to ask. Yeah.
What if the product itself is content? How does this process differ? And for instance, do you take guest blogs, or do you share information in that way?
Yeah, I mean, the Hive is doing some guest blogging and some contributions. I mean, with my Innovation Economy blog, I haven't really done guest contributions, but like Xconomy is an example, or Bostonno is an example of blogs. TechCrunch runs a lot of contributions, particularly over the weekend when they don't have their writers producing new content. So you can try, if you start to notice like there are blogs that matter to you, or publications that matter to you that have a lot of entrepreneurs writing stuff or have a lot of content submissions, do that. Was there someone else who had their hand up? Because I want to touch a little bit on the sort of building relationships idea. We'll make you ask a question.
It might be like the second section, what you're about to talk about. Are you going to talk about like top 3 definite no-nos in terms of your relationship with the press, like things besides these kind of annoying emails, just things that have happened that have really pissed you off, or?
I'm trying to think about like the top 3. Like the one that we've already talked about is just like the shotgun approach, where it's like they haven't read anything that you've written or don't know what you're covering, and so it's just this very generic email. Stuff that they're sending you like, hey, we just sent out a press release at 8 a.m. this morning, and I wanted to make sure you saw it. That follows this like, don't make me feel like I'm chasing the bus. Like I'd rather be on the bus, or like on a, Vespa scooter 2 miles ahead of the bus, as opposed to feeling like I'm chasing the bus. I think a lot of times people are like obnoxious in this way of like, I need to hear back from you in 30 minutes, or I'm going to TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal, Fortune, and The Economist, and so like, whatever, like, I'm on a plane and I read that email and I'm like, what a jerk, like I had 30 minutes to, before the message self-destructed. I'm trying to think about like other no-nos. I mean, like I'm very forgiving when it's like an email from a human being that's trying to tell me something that, hey, you may or may not be interested in covering this.
Last week they said never lie, and I was kind of surprised, because like, does that happen a lot?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like there are some people, I have a really short list of just people who like totally have burned bridges with me, where like the lying often happens when I'm like assertively covering something that maybe someone doesn't want covered yet. So like you have a stealth mode startup and I'm like, hey, I heard that Kleiner Perkins just gave you $5 million. Is that true or not? Like, absolutely not. Well, I'll tell you when we raise money. We have definitely not raised any money from Kleiner Perkins. And then the next day at noon, the press release goes out. It's like Kleiner Perkins has funded startup X. It doesn't happen that often because, I think people generally realize lying is bad, but I did call like this one guy who's an entrepreneur, and I was like, so I heard you're leaving company A to go to startup. You're leaving a big company to go to this startup. Absolutely not. I will tell you if it happens, but your information is totally incorrect. And like 2 weeks later, like he went to that startup. And so like that's a really good way to burn bridges. I mean, you can always say no comment. If someone is asking you about some funding you're not ready to announce, or someone you hired, or whatever, that you're doing this major pivot and you don't want to announce it yet, like you can just say no comment, but I will call you when I can talk to you, as opposed to like, I think it's a character thing of like some people's impulse is just to say, totally not true. Yeah.
So actually at the marketing workshop, they said not to say no comment, but you could say, we're not at the point where we're, we can share this story, but you'll be, one of the first people that we contact. If you ask the question, did you get $5 million? And then I answer, I'm not ready to talk about it, you're not going to run with the they did get $5 million but didn't deny it. Like the lack of denial doesn't confirm, right?
The lack of denial doesn't confirm.
Right, because if you don't say something, they're like, I don't kiss and tell, and they're like, oh, I know what that means, you know, so.
Well, like, look, sometimes there are situations where like I didn't find an example in kind of like my recent coverage, but like there are sometimes examples where like I have enough data about what's going on. It's like, okay, someone left Wayfair and someone else left TripAdvisor and they're forming a new startup and they have $2 million from Google Ventures and here's what they're doing. And I have it from enough sources, and then I call you, one of the founders, and say like, here's what I know, and you can say, look, I just can't say anything at this point. You could try to ask me not to run the story, you know, but a lot of journalists are going to just say, no, I have enough information, but if you want to correct anything, you know, correct anything I've gotten wrong. But, you know, you just have to realize there are some, you know, if you find yourself in that position of people have decided like that you are the next Twitter, and they're calling you, you know, having heard on the grapevine information about you, like you may be in that position of either deciding like, do I run with this or do I just no comment and kind of have it be out of my control? It's almost always a good idea to comment because it's easy for reporters to feel like you're a jerk if you no comment or hang up the phone or even say nicely, I can't comment at this time. Like you're suddenly their enemy. And even if you just comment and say a few vague things about like, look, I can tell you we're in the aromatherapy space, but that's all I can say. You know, like that's a little bit better. And I was giving this advice, you know, like I don't ever really do consulting and don't tell anyone that I'll like give advice. But, you know, one of the co-founders of Akamai called me a few weeks ago and said like, the Globe is doing this story about my country club in Belmont. And like we sort of had this construction project that got out of hand. Do you know the story I'm talking about?
I totally know.
Yeah.
That's way over budget.
Yeah, so like, you know, they wanted to build a $10 million clubhouse and it turned into a $25 million clubhouse and everybody, the contractors hate the members and the members hate the other members. And so it's like a real mess. And he was saying like, should I no comment or should I talk to the reporter that's working on the story? You know, my advice is like, talk to them and just tell them what you're doing as a human being, you know, and like what the situation is from your perspective. Otherwise, you kind of are going to become the enemy and you're going to be the caricature of the like wealthy country club dude who had this project go awry. So, and I think he did wind up giving them a few comments for the story. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to get to a couple pitches, but was there one? Yeah, you have the mic. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi. So one other question for you. It's very clear that we can provide unique tidbits and other stuff like that, but I'm curious, sort of beyond the unique information that we can give you, what else can we do that's helpful for you? So as a journalist, what are you really, really looking for that maybe we as a group of entrepreneurs or people in this space can help you with, in addition to kind of our own unique
It's
thing?
great because you segued directly into kind of this topic number 5 that we skipped over about building relationships. And so I'll tell you, like, in the best case scenario, like what the ultimate source is for a journalist. And it's someone who like is not always pitching you about their company or telling you like what's so great about what they're doing, but it's someone who is like occasionally tweeting you or emailing you with a tip about the industry as a whole. Like, oh man, you know, I've totally noticed that VCs are fleeing from, you know, investing in, you know, mobile payment all of a sudden. And, you know, that really just seems like, you know, I've met with 7 VCs recently and they've all said they're totally done with mobile payment. They just feel like the space is a mess or there are too many players or whatever. So like insidery tips and observations and things that you've heard are great. And you can even say, look, you know, you didn't hear this from me, but you know, this company, Color, that raised $80 million, like they're firing their CEO and it's just, you know, it's a disaster over there and you should look into it. But don't tell them, you know, don't tell them I gave you this tip. So like, you can provide kind of environmental information. Like reporters will love you for that. And then when you go to them and say like, hey, I would love for you to write a story about, we just landed our first big, you know, aerospace customer, whatever it is, like life is a game of favors, you know, and you know, so doing favors by providing interesting tips or story ideas, or, I mean, you don't have to feel like a total dirtbag about it, but sometimes it's just, you know, something that you've noticed that's interesting. Like you've been out in the world and you happen to see that Swiss baker is using some crazy new loyalty system where, you know, they take a picture of every customer, and then when you pop in, they remember like what your favorite sandwich is. So it can be just stuff you're seeing in the world that you think would be interesting to journalists. When journalists call you, often like when you're starting to build a relationship with somebody who's knowledgeable about a space, they'll often call you about a story that doesn't include you in particular, and sometimes they're like on a really tight deadline. Like I did a lot of writing for Wired's website, and you know, it'd be 5 o'clock in the evening, and you'd be trying to get a hold of just anyone who could give you a quote or an interesting opinion about, you know, back in that day it was like Yahoo buying some company, and it was like, if you can offer a perspective or a quick quote to a journalist, like that's another way you can build relationships. And then just, I would say like at the high level, they're interested in like help, we're interested in help kind of like just increasing the resolution of our radar. So like introducing other entrepreneurs and other companies and marketplace trends and things that you're seeing can be really helpful. And like I said, it doesn't hurt, as I said before, it doesn't hurt to sort of let people know, like, hey, I read this piece that you wrote, I thought it was dead on, or I read this piece and I think you missed, you know, in a nice way, I think you missed some angle of what's going on in the market. Like reporters are not generally arrogant, and they kind of always want to be improving, you know, their ability to write about a particular space. So, you know, if you can find ways to help them in a nice way, as opposed to like, you totally missed the point of, you know, what you were writing about, but just to say like, hey, you should have, you know, next time you cover this, you might want to know that, you know, whatever, everybody's throwing out their enterprise software and going completely SaaS and, you know, whatever. So are there any other questions about what we've covered so far? Because I'd love to have a couple people stand up with a mic and just give a little bit of like what you think your pitch might be in talking to the media, and we can not critique it, but just maybe try to be constructive, and I can talk about what sort of questions I might have or like how you might spin it differently. But other questions before we start that? Yeah.
Do you advise hiring a PR company?
Do I advise hiring a PR company?
I know you talk about building relationships, but do you think that will help?
You know, in some cases, yes. I mean, it's expensive. And so like, I think for a lot of startups for the first year or 2 or 3, you know, it's like everyone advises like make the first couple sales yourself and make the first couple customer visits yourself. And like you as the founder really need to like get that feel for like what story is going to work and what makes reporters interested in us. And so like if you are lucky enough that you raise $5 million and you feel like you could hire a PR firm, I think it's probably a mistake to do that right out of the gate. But once you get a little bit of a feel for what this is like, and you start to feel like, gee, I would love to have someone's help in reaching out in a really targeted way, because we now have a list of like, you know, Jane was talking about like trying to target working moms. Well, there might be like, or stay-at-home moms. There might be 100 blogs and magazines and TV shows that could reach that audience. And so at that point, like maybe you do want an individual PR consultant or a firm to help you, you know, but use all this intelligence that I'm giving you and tell them, look, I don't want you to have your newest hire start spamming every journalist with the pitch. You know, like I want it to go like this. You know, here's what I've learned works in pitching. And so, you know, you don't want to be paying someone $15,000 or $20,000 a month on a retainer to do stuff that isn't going to work. Does that make sense? You know, I think it can be a good thing in a lot of situations, particularly because there are PR firms that legitimately like will have a great relationship with Walter Mossberg at the Journal, or will know producers at Good Morning America or at CNBC or whatever, and can kind of open doors for you that would take a lot of your time and effort to open otherwise. Yes?
So another question on how should we try to schedule relationships thank you, with the writers versus the editors. So since, for example, we've been trying to get some coverage from essentially Chronicle of Higher Education, right?
Yeah.
So which is a magazine, you know, right, specifically for the higher education is reaching our audience. So should we write to pitch to the writers or to the editors of the section? Like, what's the difference really?
Generally writers. I mean, it's very rare that like, you know, sometimes there are cases where like, you know, someone would tell a story to the editor of Wired and she would go to me and say, or Chris Anderson, the most recent editor that I worked with there, would come to me and say like, hey, we really want someone to write this story. So look, if you happen to bump into an editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education or anyone you're trying to reach and you're in the buffet line at a conference or at some kind of schmooze fest, like, yeah, tell the editor what you're up to and try to get them interested in. But I think like if it's the block and tackling, like I'm here on Monday morning and I need to get some, users, employees, investors, you'll get better payback from targeting writers, So would a couple people, Tom, and then maybe would 3 or 4 people stand up and kind of just, we'll do some nice, very gentle, non-critical feedback.
I don't want to let you get out of here without talking a little bit about the state of the Boston ecosystem. So do you think student entrepreneurs are making well-informed choices about whether to stay here and build their business or go elsewhere in New York, Silicon Valley? Do you think they're making well-informed decisions, and how do you think about your responsibility for telling that story, like the mix of advocacy versus criticism and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, they're 2 good questions, which, I do try to be like an advocate for, for things that I think would make the ecosystem better. I think like the big problem I focused on, I went out to work in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco specifically, for a couple years, and just to sort of experience and write about that ecosystem. And then when I came back in 2007, like I started thinking about like, well, so what are the differences and what are the issues that Boston has? And like, one of the issues is just that like a lot of people come here for school, whether it's grad school or undergrad, and like they then feel sort of the magnetism of whatever, New York, LA, Silicon Valley, some other place. And so what is the magnetism here for entrepreneurs? And I think, there are a lot of positive things that I think are starting to move the needle on keeping people here, whether it's like Techstars, the iLab, a zillion accelerator programs in healthcare and there's a new one called Bolt that's in sort of hardware, kind of consumer electronics. There's stuff like Rough Draft VC that's funding student entrepreneurs that didn't exist a year ago, basically. So I think it's becoming a better place to do startups, and it's like a great place to do certain kinds of startups. Like if you're in life sciences or healthcare, like there's no better place in the world to be doing a startup right now. But I think like in consumer tech and digital media, there are lots of compelling reasons why you'd want to be in New York or San Francisco. And so, as you know, like it would be doing a disservice to the entrepreneur to say, stay here and try to prove the rule, try to be the exception to the rule that like Boston investors get, consumer social media and that like we could produce a Facebook or Instagram or Twitter type company here. That probably is a bad answer to the question. But yeah, I just think it's a real key for the ecosystem and kind of continuing to try to produce different kinds of companies and not just say like, oh, we can do life sciences and healthcare and maybe robotics and enterprise software really well, and to figure out ways to support other kinds of entrepreneurs. So would a couple people just try like and give me the 1 minute, here's what I would say if I was in the buffet line with the journalist or on the phone with the journalist about my company?
Hey,
and
Scott.
tell us who you are.
Yeah, thanks for speaking with us here today. So my name is Vincent, and I'm a former investment banker turned hippie Tai Chi instructor that's trying to marry my passion for profits and people in a new well-tech startup.
In a new what kind of tech startup?
Well-tech, so like a
Well-tech.
wellness technology company.
Uh-huh. And so what's the company called?
It's called Wellwin.
Uh-huh.
And it's a website where you can go, you take an assessment, and then based on the assessment, you get matched to a personalized network of local wellness providers. So anything from yoga to nutrition to massage therapy to art therapy.
That's cool. And so you could, do you teach Tai Chi somewhere here in Boston right now?
Well, that's how I started. So for a while I worked at a cafe, and then I, started teaching Tai Chi and doing personal training. But I realized I still had that kind of entrepreneurial, analytical numbers drive in me. So now I'm trying to bring the two together with a startup.
Cool. And when did you leave the world of investment banking?
Well, first I went to New York. I worked at Morgan Stanley. worked there in investment banking, then went to Brazil and did private equity, and I didn't like it there either. So that was about 2 years ago, and then I mopped floors at an ice cream shop for a while as I figured things out.
Cool. So, one interesting approach for you could be like, getting people out there to experience something is an interesting pitch, or like adding that as an element of like, hey, I would love to set you up with, show you how our system works and set you up with an acupuncturist or masseuse or Tai Chi instructor or whatever, as a way to like, I want you, if you pick whoever your target journalist is, to say like, hey, I would really love for you to try this, try our site, and the way I'd like to do it is by having you really experience it. That's something that, that sort of the way to get out of the office and to write about it from a first-person point of view is something that a lot of journalists really resonate with. And so, like, I think about examples where, like, I would do Fast Company stories and, like, go into the kitchen of Pret-a-Manger and, like, work for a day in the kitchen and have that experience of, like, oh my gosh, these guys are fanatical about their sandwiches. They're throwing away half of the sandwiches I make, because I'm not spreading the filling properly. So, I would maybe play that up in your pitch, like, just so that you're not another website, so that you have this other element of like, I'd love for you to look through the website and find some provider that you'd love to, have an appointment with, and, you can see how it works that way.
Great, I'll be in touch.
All right, cool. Oh, sorry, you have the mic, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Rohan, thanks for coming down. So I'm one of the co-founders of this company called Chefstro. What we do is we connect people who want to host parties at their home with professional chefs from the best restaurants in Boston. So we're an online platform that lets you host a party at your home without the hassle.
And how's it different from kitchen surfing?
So kitchen surfing is a platform where it's not hassle-free, because you as a host put out a request and then 20 chefs on the platform contact you, and you have to interact with 20 different chefs. At the same time, chefs take multiple days to get to you, because out of 20 chefs, you're only going to go with one chef. That lowers their incentive. On our system, what we've done is we've created a cuisine-based system wherein you see the cuisine and you pick the cuisine. And at the back end, we have identified which chef is the best chef for that type of cuisine. So we've reduced the hassle at both the chef's end and at your end. So we are a lot more receptive to customers than kitchen surfing.
Cool. And do you have people who are doing events like on a weekly basis?
So right now what we've done, so the idea was born out of a competition at HBS. We were a winner in that competition. At this point of time, we are starting out with 13 chefs in Boston. The idea is that we have 110 chefs on the platform right now, but we are only starting off with the best 13. So these guys are right from instructors at Le Cordon Bleu in Boston to MasterChef top 10 winners. And we're looking to launch in Boston literally this week.
Oh, cool. And say the name again, because I didn't catch it.
Chefstro.
Chef's Row?
Chefstro.
Oh, Chefstro.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you did really great. We should applaud after each one of these, right, to be encouraging. That was for you, too. So a couple things you did and that you got me thinking about. One is just sometimes it makes sense if people have something in their brain like kitchen surfing or like Uber or something in your space, mentioning it as part of your pitch can be a hook. Like we're just, we think kitchen surfing is an interesting idea, but we're going to be, we're going to be the winner in that space, and here's why. Just because, like, when people are talking vaguely about like what they do or the problem they're solving, not that you did this, but when there's vagueness, it's just too easy to hang up the phone or to go on to the next email. So like you're looking for that hook, and we talked a little bit about it before with David versus Goliath. Like company A, but we're taking a different approach to this. And you explained it beautifully, kind of how your approach is different. But you might try as experimentation as you're pitching it, like kitchen surfing has raised money and gotten a lot of buzz, but we actually think it creates too much work for the party host, and here's how we're approaching it. I think the other thing you got me thinking about is just pictures. Like a lot of times startups, a blogger will say like, hey, do you have pictures of a great meal that your chefs have put together? I want to run it with my blog post. Or do you have pictures of the founding team? And it's amazing how many times like no one has thought to like just get a friend with an SLR to take a couple pictures of like the prototype or a dinner, with lots of people having a good time, or just the founding team standing together. And they're like, no, I guess you could use my LinkedIn photo, you know, and like, those are generally not great photos to run if you're a blog, and they're horrible photos to run if you're a magazine or newspaper. So have those ready before someone asks for them, because you don't want to be like, well, could you wait 48 hours until I get my friend with the SLR, you know, to shoot the pictures. And you could also do, talking about like making things experiential, I mean, if you're pitching journalists, you could say like, hey, we want to have one of our chefs, you know, cater a lunch for your staff, you know, and see how it works. Or like, do you want to invite, if it's a blogger, do you want to invite some of your readers to a, you know, to a lunch, and the bill's on, you know, the tab's on us.
Can I ask a follow-up question
real
quick? So we have chefs on our system right now who are on kitchen surfing, got no work out of kitchen surfing, but when we've even done a trial phase, have loved our platform and love to be on our platform.
Yeah.
Is it advisable, considering that it's like literally David versus Goliath, to put these chefs out there saying that the reason why chefs are coming to our platform rather than kitchen surfing and are much happier is because of this?
I mean, I don't think you have to be like really, you know, Machiavellian about it, but I think that, you know, you could offer, it's always nice when you offer to journalists, like, I'm happy to have you interview a chef, or I'm happy to have you interview one of our first customers, or, you know, having sources other than yourself that you can hook people up with. You know, we just signed on a great advisor who helped, you know, who helped build Google from, you know, $0 in revenue to the first 100 million, and like, I'm happy to have you talk to that person. Like, sometimes journalists want other points of view, but I don't think you need to give the chef talking points about, you know, could you explain in your interview how we're better than kitchen surfing? You know, if it naturally comes up, great. And I do think it gets to this idea of a trend story where, like, I wrote a column a few weeks ago just about my experience using Uber and Sidecar and Lyft. And, you know, so if you're the next kind of ride-sharing service, pitching yourself as part of that context and part of that milieu is a good way to get people to, you know, to think it's a story as opposed to just like yet another two-person startup.
So, question, where's the boundary around, like, I don't know if there's a ethical thing or whatever about offering to comp for some of the services? Like, the guy in the well-tech space, could he say, like, I'd love for you to use the platform and see if you could match up with the service provider, and I'll buy you your first massage?
Right.
Is that okay?
You know, I mean, it's okay to offer. I mean, every journalist will have different rules about, like, well, if it's worth more than $50, I can't accept it. But in the world of bloggers, like, man, there's such a history of, like, people will take laptops given to them by Microsoft, and someone who's like works for GM's PR agency was like, hey, we want to give you any GM car for a week to drive around. And I was like, I don't know, you know, that just feels like I'm being manipulated, but I'm sure other people said yes to that offer. And so, you know, don't be sleazy where you feel like you're trying to buy coverage from them in some way. But like, look, there are lots of times when I take sources out to lunch, or they buy my lunch, or I go to experience. I mean, like, if someone said we're starting a new private jet-based business and, you know, we'd love to fly you and your family to Las Vegas, like, yeah, that's something where I would probably have to talk to my editor at the Globe and say, like, okay, I do want to write about this, but I think I have to write about it without taking, you know, $15,000 worth of private jet travel. But again, you could fill that jet with bloggers, you know, 100 times over, who don't have editors. Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Chris Goldstein. I founded Cardis along with Andrew Cole here. We just graduated. We're really good friends from high school. Basically, we've both worked a lot kind of in nonprofit NGO context within international development. And when we've gotten home at various times, or when we've been on the ground there, we've tried to find experts next door, essentially, who were doing similar work or work that could be synergistic with our own. And we realized it was extremely difficult after Googling for 4 hours and like just walking around. It took about a month to actually find a guy who I needed. And so we came back, and what we're doing is we're crowdsourcing a map of nonprofit and NGO activity within international development. And the rationale for why we're crowdsourcing it is because obviously map, it's simple, it's intuitive, and it's cheap. But at the end of the day, nonprofits and NGOs want to input the data because they don't have the time to do so. And so a lot of young college-age volunteers and interns who are coming back want to share their experiences, want to put them out there, want to showcase their impact. And what we're doing is we're aggregating this onto a map. So not only do I get to showcase what I'm doing, but at the end of the day, we get this map output so you can find the expert next door.
That's cool. And are you doing it as a for-profit or as a not-for-profit, or you're not sure?
So we're a little unsure right now. We're looking into really kind of like the for-profit space, and the rationale behind that is really like we want to return investment to like actual foundations, like putting money in. But more importantly, it's really difficult to attract tech talent like within the sector. And we think that looking from a more meta kind of like level, if you had stronger tech talent in this sector, you could have more efficient and like better outcomes. And so the way we're kind of doing it in a for-profit context is we're looking at ways to actually build small insular networks for small foundations who have small administrative overhead and a ton of projects. And so that's
okay. Here's what I want to do, just since I noticed that it is just now 6 o'clock. I want to take like, since we started about 20 minutes late, can I take like 5 more minutes to just wrap up with any other questions or more pitches? Is that all right? And if you have to leave, feel free to leave, but I will end by 6:05 promptly. So it's a really cool idea. It's definitely the sort of thing I would write about. Yeah, and kudos to you. I think that there's like a way, in the same way that like if you're pitching investors or you're pitching anyone that you want to be involved, like it feels like there's a way to sharpen up kind of what it is in a little bit less time, where you might, you can often say like, okay, do you know Google Maps and how it pops up businesses and universities? Like we want to do that for nonprofits and people who are trying to change the world, so that you'd have this really visual map where you could see all of the people who've worked in different regions and what they've done and what they know about, so that they can help others working in those regions. Or it's just something like a little tighter and more compact, just because it's been like 2 hours now since I finished my iced coffee, and like people, people's minds are just, particularly if you're calling them on the phone, like they're doing email or they're responding to a tweet or they're doing something else. And so like that first 30 seconds really does matter a lot. And just sort of, do you know this? Have you tried Uber? Have you, are you a user of Yelp? Like, is there something you have experience with? Here's what we're trying to do that's kind of similar. Just, those analogies, those comparisons, getting something concrete in someone's brain in the first 30 seconds is really important. So, but great, it's a cool concept. And, I would just say like when there's a mission to something and you're trying to like solve problems, make the world better, like journalists want to write about that much more than they want to write about like the 900 millionth, social media analytics dashboard for marketers. So you have that going for you. Maybe one more person who wants to stand up and try a pitch in the front here.
Hi, my name is Svetlana, and I am the founder of Project Lever, which can actually be used by a lot of people in this room, hopefully, since it's helping students start research projects. So we're actually working with the universities to create the profiles of advisors that have available research opportunities and can take on the students. So we're looking to simplify the process whereby you actually find research opportunity. And we have already worked with a number of major universities here in the Boston area, as in Harvard, Tufts, and MIT. We ran some pilot projects, and we're actually hopefully looking to sign up some major contracts going into the fall, which is somewhere where we'd love to have some press about this. And we want to fit into the conversation about the online education, where, so which is primarily now dominated by the MOOCs, where it's sort of like one professor and a lot of students, and we're looking to flip this a little bit and essentially have one student being able to work with multiple professors.
Cool. Great job. I think the one thing that you did that was really good is just say, like we're planning to launch in the fall, I think is what you said, and that, having some element of urgency of like, here's what's happening. Like journalists call it the news hook. Like, so what's the news hook? Like often people don't want to write a company profile, but they want to know that like, we're launching in November, or our app is going to be in the App Store now, or we're going to announce our angel round, on September 1st, or whatever it is. They want to understand like what is the timing of this, and that kind of like gets their brain working in an interesting way, because everything is about what am I going to write about tomorrow, or geez, August is a really difficult month because no one wants to announce anything, and thank you for giving me a story that I can write about in August. Or like the week between Christmas and New Year's, like that's the best week to try to get a journalist's attention. The thing I would say is like you could, I know here you're doing an elevator pitch kind of in front of a room full of people, but when you're having the one-on-one conversation, you could ask someone like, you know, did you ever do any research for a professor when you were in school? Even if they say no, like, well, part of the problem is just matching up the best students with the researchers who need them, and just kind of trying to get the person to understand on an individual basis, like what the problem is that you're solving. Like you could go in that direction with your pitch, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. So any last questions? I'm happy to stick around for a little bit, but if there's any burning questions on your mind, I will answer them now. I'll answer them later. Hopefully this has been helpful. I put my Twitter handle, my blog address, and my Gmail address up there. Like, you know, if you have other questions, I'd love to hear from you. Or if there's, you know, if there's some point where like you're looking for coverage, or you want to try to connect with somebody else that you think I might know or am connected with on LinkedIn, you know, I'm happy to help. Just as my thanks for all of you guys coming on a July afternoon to this workshop. So thank you so much.